My daughter said she didn't want my embarrassing work stories shared at her office's awards night. She wanted her colleagues to see her as self-made. So I stopped taking her calls about her rent. What happened next was rather unbelievable. Let me tell you everything. I'm a father, 63 years old, if you're keeping track, and I've spent most of my life in a welding shop. My hands are still rough from the years, fingers always stained with the kind of grime that never really washes out. I'm not the kind of man who likes to talk about feelings or fuss over things I can't fix, but I've always believed that a story can mend what the world tries to break. And I've got plenty of stories, you know? I used to think they were harmless, even proud. But the night my daughter told me not to share them at her office's awards dinner, it felt like I'd been silenced in a language I never even knew I was speaking. She didn't say it with cruelty, exactly. She said it with that patient voice she uses when she's sure she's right. Dad, I don't want them to think I got here because of you. I want them to see me as self-made. Self-made. Like the checks I wrote for her rent every month didn't matter. Like the late nights I'd spend in the workshop, sometimes on a job, sometimes just killing time because I didn't know how to sleep when she was still out there building her name, had nothing to do with the glow she wore on that stage. She didn't mean to hurt me, but she did. You ever been in that kind of silence? Where you feel like your whole life was just a prelude to someone else's triumph? I didn't know what to say to her that night, so I just nodded. Let her be self-made. Let her stand on that stage and let the world believe she was forged out of nothing but her own spark. I drove home that night with the radio off, just listening to the engine hum and the sound of my breath catching in my throat. My old truck has a rattle in the dash that's always reminded me of her laughter, something bright and insistent. But that night it just sounded hollow. I kept replaying her words in my head. I want them to see me as self-made. The thing is, I didn't mind her wanting to be seen that way. What cut was the way she said it. Like everything I'd done was a shadow she needed to step out of. Like my stories were just noise that kept her from shining. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a long time, watching the porch light flicker. There's a bulb that always goes out too fast, and I keep meaning to fix it, but that night I let it stay dark. The next morning, she called me. She wanted to thank me for understanding. She said she knew it was hard for me to stay quiet. I told her it wasn't hard at all. And in a way, it wasn't. It felt like slipping out of a jacket that never quite fit right. But that's not the whole truth. The real truth is that it felt like I was stepping out of her life altogether. She didn't hear that part, though. Maybe because I didn't say it. Maybe because she didn't want to. So I didn't share my stories. I didn't stand in the back of that awards dinner and beam like a fool when they called her name. I didn't even go. I told her I had work that night, which wasn't exactly a lie. I had work, just not the kind she could see. The thing about wanting to be seen as self-made is that you don't get to pick which pieces of yourself you cut away. She wanted them to see her without me, so I gave her that. But I also stopped taking her calls about the rent. I figured if she wanted to be self-made, she could be self-made in every sense of the word. I kept the money in an envelope on my counter, 3 months' worth, just sitting there like a dare I didn't want to take. I waited to see if she'd notice, if she'd call and ask. If she'd realize that being self-made means more than standing alone on a stage, it means standing alone in the dark, too. I stopped taking her calls the way you stop opening a door that only brings cold air in. It wasn't planned, not at first. I'd see her name light up on the screen, my thumb hovering over the green button, but I'd freeze, because I knew she wouldn't be calling to check on me. She'd be calling about the rent, or maybe to say thank you in a way that always felt like an afterthought. I didn't want to hear it anymore. I wanted to see if she'd figure out how to make it without me picking up the pieces. The first week was the hardest. I'd sit in my chair in the workshop, the phone on the table next to my coffee cup. I'd feel it buzzing, and every time I didn't answer, my chest felt like it was wrapped in barbed wire. There was always this part of me that wanted to explain. To tell her it wasn't about punishment, it was about trust. But I didn't. I just let it ring. She left voicemails, and I didn't listen to them. I told myself if she really needed me, she'd come find me in person. She didn't. The second week, I started filling the silence with old projects. I fixed a broken chair that had been sitting in the corner of the workshop for years. I sanded it down until the wood was smooth again, even though no one would ever sit in it. I kept my hands busy because my mind was anything but still. The whole time, I kept thinking about her voice at that awards dinner, confident, polished, nothing like the little girl who used to beg me to tell her bedtime stories because she couldn't sleep. I wondered if she'd forgotten the way I used to braid her hair in the mornings before school, or how I'd put extra sugar in her tea because she said the bitter taste reminded her of all the ways the world could be cruel. The third week, I stopped checking the phone altogether. I turned it off and let the battery die. It was easier to pretend she wasn't calling at all. Easier to pretend I was finally free of the weight of her needs. But that's not really the truth, is it? The truth is, every silence felt like another nail in the coffin of the man I used to be. The man who would have done anything to keep her safe, to keep her comfortable. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing or if I was just tired of being needed in ways that never seemed to end. I started to notice how quiet the house was without her voice. I'd always thought her laughter echoed off the walls like a song, but it turned out it was more like a heartbeat. Without it, the rooms felt smaller, colder. I'd stand in the kitchen in the morning, staring at the envelope of rent money and feeling like it was burning a hole through the counter. Some nights, I'd pick it up, almost ready to send it to her. But then I'd remember the way she looked at me when she said she wanted to be seen as self-made. And I'd put it back down. Let her be self-made. Let her find out what that really means. People talk about unconditional love like it's supposed to be this easy thing. Like it means always giving, always forgiving. But I think real love is sometimes about letting someone find out what they're really made of. Especially when it's not what you want to see. Especially when it means stepping back and letting the silence between you stretch so far it feels like it might never close again. One night, I sat in the workshop and thought about calling her. Just to hear her voice, just to say I was still here if she needed me. But I didn't. I put the phone back in my pocket and turned off the lights. I let the darkness come in, let it cover me like a shroud. Because I knew that if she was ever going to stand on her own, she'd have to learn how to find her way in the dark, too. I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing, but I knew it was the only thing I had left to give her. I started to see the world in small, measured silences. The way the workshop sounded when I turned off the radio and let the air settle. The way my coffee tasted in the morning when there was no one else to drink it with me. It's strange how a quiet house can make you see yourself more clearly. Without her voice on the other end of the line, I heard the echo of all the ways I'd tried to keep her safe. And in that stillness, I started to wonder if I'd done it because she needed it, or because I needed to feel useful. I went through the old boxes I'd kept in the attic, sorting through the pieces of a life that felt half-forgotten. School photos with her gap-toothed grin, scribbled notes from when she was learning to write, birthday cards I'd saved even when they were just stick-figure drawings with too many hearts. They'd always felt like proof that she needed me, but now they felt like echoes of something I'd tried to hold on to for too long. I sat there on the attic floor, the sun coming through the dusty window, and I realized I was just another man trying to make sense of the way love can outgrow its need for you. I found an old hammer she'd given me one Father's Day, a cheap one, the handle worn from years of use. She'd wrapped it in tissue paper and said, "For building things, Dad, so you can fix whatever breaks." I held it in my hands and wondered if she even remembered giving it to me. I wondered if she'd remember that, for all my fixing, I'd never quite learned how to mend the parts of myself that ached the most. Maybe that was the lesson I was supposed to learn now. How to fix my own heart, not just the things that broke in her life. I started to see that letting her go was its own kind of building. It was laying a foundation for something neither of us had dared to imagine, a life where she didn't need me to hold her up. A life where she could find out how strong she really was. I'd always thought love meant standing guard, but maybe it meant stepping back and letting the other person walk into the storm on their own. Letting them figure out how to keep their footing when the wind tries to knock them down. I stopped counting the days since she'd called. I stopped checking the mail for her letters. Instead, I started talking to myself in the workshop, saying the things I used to say to her when she was small. You're tougher than you think. You're stronger than you know. I said them like a prayer, not for her this time, but for me. Because I needed to believe it, too. I needed to believe that I could be more than the man who signed the checks. That I could be a man who learned how to stand alone, even if it meant letting go of the only person I'd ever truly wanted to protect. I began to write her letters I never sent, pages and pages of words I knew she'd never read. I wrote about the things I missed, the way she used to sing off-key in the shower, the way her eyes would light up when she talked about her dreams. I wrote about the ways I'd failed her, too. How I tried so hard to be the father she needed that I forgot she might want to be her own person. Each letter felt like a confession and a release, a way to pour out the parts of myself I'd kept hidden even from her. By the end of that month, I had a stack of unsent letters tied with a piece of twine, sitting next to the envelope of rent money I still hadn't sent. It felt like a monument to all the things I wasn't sure how to say out loud. I didn't know if she'd ever come to see me again. I didn't know if she'd ever ask for help. But I knew that I was done being the man who waited for the call. I was ready to see who I could be without her needing me to be the hero. One Thursday afternoon, I found myself standing across the street from her office building. I don't know what I was hoping to see. Maybe a sign that she still carried a piece of me in the way she walked or in the way she laughed with the people she called her colleagues. I kept my distance, one foot on the curb and the other on the edge of the street, feeling like I was balanced between two worlds, the father I'd been and the man who'd let her go. She looked different, her hair pulled back tight, a little more color in her cheeks than I remembered. She was talking to a group of people, her face alive with that light I'd always known was hers alone. I watched her laugh, watched the way she moved her hands when she spoke. She looked like she belonged. Like she'd found a way to claim the space she used to be so unsure of. And in that moment, I realized I was still holding that envelope of rent money in my jacket pocket, as if it were some kind of talisman I couldn't let go of. I thought about crossing the street, about walking right up to her and handing it over. But I didn't, because it wasn't really about the money. It was about the choice. It was about letting her know that she could make it on her own, even if she didn't believe it yet. So I turned away before she could see me. I walked back to my truck and sat behind the wheel, the envelope burning a hole in my chest like a secret I wasn't sure I wanted to keep anymore. On the drive home, I played our old songs on the radio, songs she used to hum in the back seat when she was just a kid. It was a kind of time travel, a way to remember the girl she used to be before the world taught her to stand so tall. But every note felt like a farewell, a reminder that she was no longer the little girl in the back seat. She was a woman now, with her own burdens and her own dreams. That night, I sat in the workshop, the envelope still in my jacket pocket. I thought about all the times I'd bailed her out, all the times I'd been the safety net she never saw but always counted on. I realized that letting her be self-made wasn't just about her. It was about me, too. It was about stepping back far enough to see the shape of the life I'd built around her and asking myself if it was really mine or just an extension of hers. I kept picturing her on that stage, the night of the awards dinner I never attended. I imagined the way she must have looked, the way her voice must have sounded when she accepted the award. I wondered if she'd mention me at all, or if she'd let them believe she'd carved out that success with nothing but her own two hands. And I wondered why it mattered so much to me, why I couldn't just be proud from a distance without needing to be part of the story. By the time the sun came up, I knew I couldn't keep carrying that envelope around like a crutch. I needed to let it go. I took it out of my jacket and laid it on the workbench, the edges soft from being carried too long. I didn't rip it up or burn it. I just left it there. A quiet decision that felt heavier than any check I'd ever written. I didn't know if she'd ever come for it. I didn't know if she'd ever even know it was there. But it felt like the first real step I'd taken back into my own life. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying the look on her face when she laughed with those people outside her office, how she looked so free, so sure of herself. It was the kind of laughter that didn't need anyone else to hold it up. And I realized that maybe that's what I'd always wanted for her. Maybe letting her go was the hardest kind of love I'd ever have to learn. It was nearly midnight when the phone finally rang again. I'd been half expecting it, the way you know a storm is coming even when the sky's clear. Her voice was small at first, like she was testing the weight of the words before she spoke them out loud. "Dad," she said, her breath hitching in that way it used to when she was a little girl trying not to cry. "I got a notice. The rent," it bounced. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to choose my words carefully, to make sure they were steady, even if my heart felt like it was splitting open. "Yeah," I said quietly, leaning back against the kitchen counter, staring at the mug I'd left half full hours ago. "I know." She went quiet then. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her mind, the way she was trying to put it all together. "You always covered it," she finally said, her voice trembling. I thought you'd always be there." I took a deep breath and let it out slow. I am here, I said. But you wanted them to see you as self-made, and I thought, maybe it's time you see it, too. There was a long silence after that. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, like the air had thickened between us. I could hear her breathing, the way it caught and shivered. I didn't mean for you to stop everything, she said finally, her voice shaking with something that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't far from it. I just didn't want you to overshadow me. I know, I said softly, but overshadowing isn't the same as being there. You wanted to stand on your own. So I'm letting you. My voice was calm, but inside I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I'd never come back from. She didn't say anything for a long moment, and in that silence I heard every memory we'd ever shared. The scraped knees and the bedtime stories. The late-night phone calls when her world was falling apart and she didn't know how to put it back together. I thought about how love can feel like a net, but if you hold it too tight, it becomes a noose. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she said finally, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I don't know if I can be everything they see me as without you. I closed my eyes and let her words settle. You don't have to be everything all at once, I told her. But you have to start somewhere. You're stronger than you think. And I'm still here. Just not the same way. She sniffed, and I could hear her trying to pull herself back together. I guess I never really thought about what being self-made meant, she said. I thought it was just about proving something to them. Maybe it is, I said. Or maybe it's about proving something to yourself. I wanted to reach through the phone and hold her the way I used to when she was too small to know what the world could take from her. But I didn't, because this wasn't about me holding her up anymore. It was about her learning to stand without my hands beneath her. She didn't say goodbye. She just hung up. And I stood there in the kitchen, the silence washing over me like a wave I'd been bracing for my whole life. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. If she'd figure it out, if she'd come back to me in a way that didn't mean leaning on me like a crutch. But I knew that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the man who fixed everything. I was the man who stepped back and let her find out who she really was. And in the quiet of that kitchen, I realized that sometimes love isn't about giving. It's about letting go, letting someone fall, letting them get back up on their own. Because that's how you find out who you are when there's no one left to catch you. And maybe that's how you finally learn how to stand, too. 3 months later, she called me again. Her voice was steadier this time, each word carefully chosen, like she'd been rehearsing them for days. Dad, she said, I've got the rent covered now. I moved to a smaller place. It's not much, but it's mine. She paused, as if waiting for me to fill the silence, to jump in with an offer to help or to say I was proud. But I didn't. I let the silence stretch, let her find her own way through it. That's good, I said finally, my voice low and calm. I pictured her sitting in a tiny apartment somewhere, boxes half unpacked, a light bulb hanging from the ceiling that didn't quite reach every corner. I pictured her breathing in that space, feeling what it was like to be surrounded only by what she'd earned. I wanted to see it for myself, but I didn't ask, because this wasn't about me anymore. She told me she'd been cooking for herself, even though she burned everything at first. She said she'd started reading before bed again, something she hadn't done since college. Little things, but I could hear the quiet pride in her voice. It wasn't the kind of pride that needed an audience. It was the kind that grows in the dark when no one's watching. I realized then that this was what I'd been hoping for all along. Not for her to be perfect, just for her to learn that she didn't have to be. A few weeks later, she invited me to see her new place. I almost said no. I was afraid of what it might feel like to walk into her world and see no sign of the man who'd held it all together for so long. But I went, because she asked, and because I wanted her to see that I was still here, even if I wasn't the same man she'd always leaned on. Her apartment was small, but it was bright. Plants lined the windowsill, and there were books stacked on the floor, half read and waiting. She didn't offer me the tour. She just let me stand there, taking it all in. And in that quiet, I realized that she didn't need me to fill the space anymore. She'd already filled it with her own laughter, her own stories. We sat at her tiny kitchen table, and she poured me a cup of coffee that was too strong, too bitter. She apologized for it, but I just smiled and took a sip anyway. It tasted like a beginning, rough, imperfect, but real. She told me about her job, about the late nights and the pressure, about how she sometimes still felt like she wasn't enough. And I told her that was okay, that maybe enough wasn't something you find. Maybe it was something you build every day, one small, imperfect choice at a time. When I left, she walked me to the door. She didn't hug me, and I didn't expect her to, but she looked me in the eyes in a way she hadn't for a long time. "Thank you," she said. Not for the rent or the years I'd carried her, just for letting her find out who she was without me. I walked back to my truck, the evening air cool against my face. I didn't feel the same ache I used to, the one that said I had to be everything for her all the time. I realized that what I had done wasn't about punishment or proving a point. It was about trust, trusting that she could stand on her own, and trusting that I could, too. When I got home, I took the envelope of rent money from the workbench. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need the weight of it to remind me of what I'd given up. I burned it in the wood stove, watched the paper curl and blacken until it was nothing but ash. It felt like letting go of an old story that didn't fit anymore. Like laying down a burden I'd carried so long I forgot it wasn't mine to keep. I went to bed that night with the windows open, the cool air whispering through the house. I didn't dream of her the way I used to. I didn't see her as a little girl anymore. I saw her as a woman, strong and unsteady and real. And in the quiet that settled around me, I realized that I hadn't lost her. I'd just let her become who she needed to be. If you've ever watched someone you love pull away, only to realize that stepping back was the only way to let them grow, then you know. Sometimes love doesn't mean holding on. It means having the courage to let go. If this story felt like your story, like a quiet confession whispered in the dark, then don't walk away. I share stories like this every day. Stories about resilience, about the cracks in our hearts, and how we learn to keep going anyway. Hit that subscribe button. Be part of the ones who know that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust in the silence. See you soon in the next story.